Hello listener, the Nameless Scholar here, and today we'll be looking at the downfall of the supposedly incorruptible Great Angel. Found and raised by the mutant cannibal tribes of Baal Secundus, Sanguinius grew up despising the normal humans who had tried to murder him as an infant, taunted with images of his death at the hands of the Emperor. Sanguinius entered into a pact with Nurgle to cloak his true nature, a decision which culminated in the damnation of his entire legion as unwilling, cadaverous plague carriers. The Blood Angels now raid world after world, driven by the need to obtain fresh, untainted blood to dilute the toxins running through their veins. Even before the infant Primarch of the Blood Angels came to rest on Baal Secundus, the moon's history was one of a struggle against adversity. Although the moons of Baal had once been home to technologically advanced and bounteous human settlements, terrible wars had long since scoured them away. All that remained of the population were tribes clinging to existence, scavenging for food amongst the landscape, turned to irradiated glass and toxic sludge by the atomic and biological weapons of their forefathers. Lacking even the most basic protective equipment against the harsh radioactive environment, mutation and sickness was rife, and only the strongest and most resistant survived. Life for these scattered tribes of the Changed, as they called themselves, was one shorn of all sentimentality. The shadow of starvation was ever present, and they did what they must to survive, including eating the flesh of those who had lost the battle for survival, be they friend or foe. The only thing to strike fear into the hearts of the Change were those creatures known as the Faceless Ones. Implacable armies of killers who seemed to exist solely to hunt down and exterminate them. Stripped of their heavy protective suits and characteristic mirrored faceplates, they were nothing more than humans, and yet they looked down with contempt upon anyone bearing the stigmata of mutation. So it was that when a group of Faceless Ones came across the infant Primarch lying unprotected in the burning radioactive sands, and saw the stubby wings protruding from his back, they judged him as a mutant abomination. Had their convoy not then been attacked by a war party of the Changed, the greatest being ever to set foot on Baal Secundus would have been slain there and then. The ambush at Angel Falls, which had saved the babe's life, was just the latest skirmish in an endless struggle, and the infant Primarch grew up harboring an abiding and righteous hatred of the faceless killers who had tried to murder him. As he matured into robust adulthood, seemingly untouched by the ravages of the world's deadly legacy, he became an object of worship to the Changed, and a figure of terror to the Faceless Ones. His wings, now full and plumed with feathers of purest white, gave him the image of an angel, both terrible and divine. For his skill and savagery, he became known to both sides as Sanguinius, the Bloody Angel. The tribes of the Changed flocked to his banner, and sensing that their extinction was at hand, the Faceless Ones also banded together. At Angel Falls, the place where the Primarch had first been found, a mighty army closed in upon Sanguinius' growing warband, hemmed in on one side by cliffs, and the guns of their enemy on another. The Changed urged their beloved leader to fly away in the dead of night and save himself, but he would not leave them. The first light of dawn glinting upon Sanguinius' pristine wings signaled the start of a day of carnage unmatched since the world's great war. Even though the Changed were outnumbered more than 5 to 1, they had been trained in the arts of war by an avatar of destruction who they loved more than life itself. Allegedly, the tribes of the Change ate well that night. Victory at the Battle of Angel Falls broke the power of the Faceless Ones across Baal Secundus, and Sanguinius made certain that they would never rise again. His army scoured every inch of their blasted world and brought back numberless rat suits as trophies. In the following years, the pile of helmets, each with the mirrored faceplate symbolically smashed, grew steadily at the base of the cliff at Angel Falls. So it was with great ceremony that Sanguinius and his honor guard approached the hiding place of the very last group of Faceless Ones, a damaged bunker complex left over from the war. No barrier or bulkhead could deflect Sanguinius's righteous anger. He was the bloody angel of vengeance right up until the moment the defenders triggered the biological weapon stockpiles the bunker had been built to house. The lethal pathogens killed the Changed and Faceless One alike, and even felled the mighty Primarch. In his paralyzed state, Sanguinius was haunted by fevered dreams of a great power searching the stars to find him. He was granted visions of being greeted by the Emperor, who at first professed to be his father, but upon discovering his mutation, turned upon him and proved to be no better than the Faceless Ones. Sanguinius felt his heart plucked from his chest by the armored giant at the Emperor's side, and witnessed the genocide of every tribesman of the Changed on Baal Secundus. In the silent, funereal chill, a voice calling itself Nurgle offered Sanguinius a way to avoid this fate for him and his people. It said that the Emperor could be defeated, but only through guile. If Sanguinius could act the dutiful son, the presence promised to cloak him with a glamour that would shield his true intentions, and make all who laid eyes upon him see only the purest of spirits, fearing more for his people than for his own life. Sanguinius reluctantly agreed, and awoke, stumbling from the bunker. He saw the Emperor's fleet arriving in orbit, and their dropships streaking the night sky with fire. Protected by Nurgle's glamour, the Emperor, accompanied by Horus, joyfully accepted Sanguinius as his son, to be hailed as a pure soul, having grown up unsullied on a world of mutant cannibals. Tore at Sanguinius, but he continued the charade. Against expectation, even his wings were taken as a sign of his angelic nature, rather than a damning mutation. Sanguinius longed to tear out the Emperor's throat there and then, but the image of his lifeless body at Horus's feet stilled his hand. As a parting gift, the Emperor handed over control of the newly arrived 9th Legion of the Adeptus Astartes, mighty warriors patterned upon the gene line of Sanguinius himself. These Terran legionnaires were charged with integrating him into Imperial society, as well as exterminating the mutant tribes, so that the settlers who were to provide the Legion's new recruits would be able to thrive. Sanguinius was forced to watch helplessly as his legion built funeral pyres of his changed brothers and sisters. But slowly he came to the point where he could control their actions without raising suspicion. He slowed the purges by ordering the bulk of the legion to Baal Primaris to deal with their mutant population first. This gave him the time he needed to learn all he could about the procedure for creating new Marines, under the pretext that they would need fresh recruits to fulfill the Emperor's Great Crusade. During this time, the choking smog from the pyres made life on Baal Secundus more deadly than ever. At first, Sanguinius saw this as a blessing, as the imperial settlers sickened and became easy prey, while the tribes of change, long inured to such a hostile environment, were little affected. When the apothecaries had completed the last batch of gene seed cultured from his own body, Sanguinius recalled the Blood Angels from their pogrom. Then one by one, he revealed his true nature to them. Fired with new purpose, Sanguinius set to work reconstituting the Blood Angels with recruits drawn exclusively from his own people, the downtrodden mutant tribes of the Changed. Only the hardiest of individuals were able to survive unprotected on Baal Secundus, and they made excellent candidates, using the knowledge gleaned from the apothecaries. These new Blood Angel initiates were implanted with gene seed and entombed for a year within their sarcophagus-like life support chambers. They emerged as echoes of their Primarch, stronger, taller, and far more deadly than before, and look up the armor left by the dead Terran Legionnaires. Though Sanguinius was able to reconstitute the Legion's frontline fighting forces, he could not replace the technical knowledge that had been lost. Their forge sat idle, and the only maintenance being carried out was the most basic forms conducted by the Legion's servitors. Nurgle spoke to Sanguinius once again, offering aid in this matter in return for being let further into their souls, but the pact was roundly rebuffed. Sanguinius intended that the Blood Angels would rely upon shipments of material from the Mechanicus until they had mastered the intricacies of producing what they needed themselves. Sanguinius yearned to simply build up his forces ready for the time they could kill the Emperor, but mindful of the need to maintain the facade of loyalty, ordered his new Blood Angels to take their place in the Great Crusade. To hide their true nature, they rarely fought alongside other legions and kept themselves aloof from the Imperial army. They always met outsiders wearing full armor, and officers hid their twisted faces beneath beautiful masks of shining gold. Despite all this, rumors of their savagery on the battlefield became legendary, alongside darker tales that they drank the blood and ate the flesh of their enemies. Though true, such lurid tales were easily eclipsed by the success of the Blood Angel expeditions, but as time went on, their momentum began to falter. The Legion's lack of technical knowledge meant that everything from their vehicles, armor, and even warships were becoming increasingly inefficient and unreliable. Worse still, a malaise hung over the Legion, souring their wounds and sapping their vitality. When it was discovered that the worst symptoms of this phase could be alleviated with transfusions of blood, the exsanguination of their victims turned from cultural habit to full-blown necessity. In the face of such adversity, Sanguinius became increasingly resentful of his patron. Since the pact had been rejected, Nurgle had been silent, with demands about how much longer the Blood Angels would have to keep up the pretense of loyalty going unanswered. Every world the Legion brought into the Imperium depleted their resources further, turning their campaigns into grinding wars of attrition rather than the lightning strikes of their early years. Sanguinius was set to return to Baal Secundus to replenish the Legion's ranks, when he received an astropathic communique from Rogel Dorn, the Emperor's Praetorian. Sanguinius's fear that his true intentions had been found out proved to be correct, but instead of anger, Dorn greeted him warmly and as a fellow conspirator. He told Sanguinius things that melted his suspicions, and requested that he bring the Blood Angels to Terra, while Dorn dealt with the 3 incorruptible legions on Istvan. It was what the Blood Angels had been waiting for, but it couldn't have come at a worse time. Ground down by attrition, sickness and equipment failure, there was little chance of them arriving at Terra in time, and even less of them being in a fit state to kill the Emperor. With a heavy heart, Sanguinius opened his soul to Nurgle, and ordered his brethren to do the same. To the inhabitants of Terra, the full enormity of Dorn's actions had yet to sink in. The destruction on Istvan and the imprisonment of the Emperor inside his own palace were all too familiar to them from the blood-soaked civil wars of the Age of Strife. The appearance of Sanguinius and his Blood Angels as they emerged from their landing ships at Eternally Wall Spaceport brought home the true nature of chaos. They were gaunt, cadaverous, and marked with weeping sores, yet also revitalized by the power of the warp. Even the glamour could not hide what Sanguinius had become, or the fevered, hungry glint in his eyes. To the defenders, Dorn's rebellion had been unthinkable, but the Blood Angels were like something out of a nightmare, pausing only briefly to feed after their long voyage. Sanguinius led his battle brothers to the Imperial Palace. Inside, they greeted the demi-legion of Imperial Fists that Dorn had left behind. These palace guards turned prison warders had been charged with trapping the Emperor inside his own armored bunker of a throne room until Dorn's return from Istvan. The hatred that Sanguinius felt for the Emperor burned so brightly that in spite of his legion's lack of siegecraft, he summoned his Blood Angels from their posts on the palace's outer walls to assault the throne room's fortifications. Unsurprisingly, the attack failed, and in the confusion, the Night Lords mounted the unguarded battlements and briefly ran amok before melting back into the darkness. This led to much tension between Sanguinius and First Captain Sigismund, the commander of the Imperial Fist contingent, and caused even more when the range's true objectives eventually became apparent. Dorn's arrival was shortly followed after by that of the vengeful Sons of Horus and the Iron Warriors. This saw the Chaos Legions trying to break into the throne room, while at the same time holding off the Loyalists besieging the outer palace walls, eager to redeem their past failure and to avoid his entire legion being ordered away in disgrace to crush the pockets of resistance that were welling up worldwide. Sanguinius threw himself wholeheartedly into the defense of the palace's outer walls. Their greatest test came on the 55th day of the siege, when the Iron Warriors breached the ultimate gate as his Blood Angels repelled the enemy and sallied out to destroy their mighty war engines. Sanguinius confronted Perturabo in single combat, energized by the power of chaos and seemingly impervious to pain. The Bloody Angel triumphed over his brother Primarch, snapping his spine over a bended knee. Then, in an act that earned them the eternal hatred of the Iron Warriors, Sanguinius drained the dying Perturabo of blood and contemptuously cast the corpse back amongst his demoralized progeny. It was then the turn of the Chaos Legions to force a breach of their own, this time against the adamantium walls of the inner throne room. Once inside, it became clear that the Night Lord's earlier attack had in fact been a diversion to allow the Emperor to escape. Sanguinius led his Blood Angels in a rampage across Terra to find their quarry, and everywhere they trod, disease and sickness followed. They rapidly traced the Emperor's rude base back to the Astronomicon, an odd choice given the number of more easily defensible sites available. As they closed in on the Astronomicon, the Blood Angels ran foul of the Emperor's latest trick, reconfiguring the psychic beacon to flare with his presence, which weakened the demonic across the planet. This affected not just the creatures of the warp, but the Blood Angels themselves, reliant as they are upon Nurgle's favor. Though facing the brunt of the Loyalist legions, the Blood Angels fought on towards the Astronomicon. Every step and every death brought them closer and closer to the Emperor. They even fought on upon hearing that Dorn's heresy had died with him, and that the other Chaos Legions were fleeing the planet. All that remained for them was that they reached the critically injured Emperor, who had been returned to the Astronomicon. In the face of overwhelming numbers and escalating casualties, they fought on. But hope finally died when word reached them that even the berserkers of the Space Wolves had turned their fleet aside. With bitter resignation, Sanguinius led the Blood Angels back to Eternity Wall Spaceport, the first Chaos Legion to arrive on Terra, and the last to leave. In the wake of their defeat on Terra, the Blood Angels returned directly to Baal Secundus. They hoped to reconstitute their dangerously thinned ranks in preparation for a second attempt to kill the Emperor, but instead found their homeworld to be dead. The changes in the atmosphere they had observed before departing on the Great Crusade had greatly accelerated in their absence, shrouding the moon in pestilent, acrid mists. It was unclear if this was a twisted reward from Nurgle for their service, or even a punishment for their ultimate failure on Terra. But in either case, the result was the same. The tribes of the Changed, who had survived the Faceless Ones, the pitiless Rad Deserts, and even the pogroms of the Terran Astartes, had finally been annihilated. Cursing the name of Nurgle, Sanguinius ordered his legion to divide down to the level of individual grand companies, hoping that smaller, more mobile fleets would be better able to evade the Imperial Navy and cover a wider area to find new recruits to their cause. Though rebuilding their ranks was their goal, it soon became clear that the phage which afflicted them was far more debilitating than they had suspected. The frequency with which blood transfusions were required to alleviate the symptoms increased, forcing Blood Angel raids to focus more upon securing captives than on recruitment. Worse still, their requirement for healthy subjects meant that simply claiming a world and bleeding it dry was out of the question, as their very presence rapidly tainted the populace with Nurgle's plagues. The apothecarian sanguinary priests had to become adepts not just at transfusing their brethren, but at transplanting organs to replace those atrophied by the buildup of toxins. In the most severe cases, the poisons rotted away the brain itself, causing violent insanity, the so-called Black Rage, which made them a grave danger to friend and foe alike. Known to their brothers as the Lost, these creatures are locked away in the darkest bowels of the fleet's ships, sustained only by the unholy powers of the warp. With this constant drain on their numbers, as well as the grinding battle of simply staying alive, the Blood Angels have instead fallen into taking their pleasure in punishing the Imperial worlds they raid. Sanguinius, however, has never forgotten his original purpose and moves between his fleets, urging them on to build towards the long-delayed second assault on Terra. There is a tension between the Blood Angels and their patron deity that has echoed down the millennia since that first misunderstood pact on Baal Secundus. Nurgle has never been able to force Sanguinius to fully submit to his will, but despite this, the Plague God has either been unwilling or unable to convert a more pliable legion to his wholehearted worship. It is possible that seeing the Blood Angels desperately battle against the grinding entropy of his gifts holds more interest for Nurgle than that of the blind adoration he receives from his more obedient followers. Even as a youth leading his tribes to war against the Faceless Ones, Sanguinius would fly over the battlefield before swooping down to tear into the heart of the enemy line. This simple joy, from a time before his life was marred either by Nurgle or the Emperor, has been imprinted upon the soul of each and every Blood Angel, and is reflected in the Legion's fighting style. Highly mobile assault squads make up the vanguard of every Blood Angel's force, and the competition to gain a place amongst their ranks is fierce. Lacking the technical knowledge required to create or even maintain traditional patterns of Astartes jump pack, a brother must make his own personal pact to create and empower their demon engine. These archaic devices emit a discordant sound more akin to the buzz of a swarm of flies than the roar of turbofans. In concert with those of their squad brothers, they come together to strike unnatural harmonics that can send their opponents screaming in terror rather than face them. In support of the assault wave come infantry squads in vehicles that, despite their ramshackle and corroded appearance, can produce a remarkable turn of speed. These tactical and havoc squads provide invaluable covering fire, and once the battle is over, they cordon the enemy survivors so that they can be tested for tissue compatibility by the sanguinary priests. Some of those that remain are gifted by the commander to slate the first of the brethren he deems to have fought most valiantly, but the majority are allowed to live. However, this is not done out of kindness. In their flight to other settlements, these refugees carry the seas of sickness across the land. When the Blood Angels wish to ensure the downfall of a planet, they will delay their return to the plague fleets and focus their attention beyond small-scale raids. In such instances, they unleash the full power of their necrotic arsenal and become true harbingers of Nurgle's power. The land sickens and the cloying stench of death fills the air. Clouds of flies blot out the sun and the ground becomes slick with decomposing vegetation. Victims of diseases in outlying settlements are herded in their millions against the defenders' strongholds. Only when the enemy's morale is at its lowest, ebb and stocks of ammunition run low, do the Blood Angels finally attack. Such strategies are effective against all but the most stalwart of opponents, and yet there is one final, terrible weapon in their armory: the mindless hordes of the lost. Though they are undeniably lethal on the battlefield, the lost are completely uncontrollable, unable to distinguish former friends from foes. Beyond such tactical considerations, the lost are terrible reminders of the fate that lies in store for them all. For this reason, only the direst of circumstances would prompt a Blood Angel commander to sanction their use on the battlefield. The Blood Angels retain the same basic organizational structure they had during the Great Crusade, and revere Sanguinius as their primarch and wellspring of their existence. However, their renegade status, along with the need to raid far and wide to stave off the Black Rage, has necessitated that the Legion fragment down to the level of individual grand companies. Because of the vast distances that separate the plague fleets, each grand company captain has a great deal of independence and autonomy, although on occasion 2 or more fleets will converge to carry out particularly large and audacious attacks. Each grand company, indeed each ship in the plague fleet, has its own cadre of sanguinary priests and rite masters, powerful individuals who wield great influence. Without the sanguinary priests of the Apothecarian to hold the Black Rage at bay, the Blood Angels would rapidly descend into little better than mindless beasts. The Rite Masters are responsible for the Legion's ships, armor and weapons. Much of the technical knowledge for proper maintenance was lost during Sanguinius's bloody reformation of the original Legion, and that which survived was useless in the face of Nurgle's corrosive influence. Instead, the Rite Masters use their sorcery to bind and compel the myriad demonic entities that inhabit everything from the plague ships to their vehicles and even the armor they wear. Moving between the different plague fleets, accompanied by his honor guard of ancient veterans, is Sanguinius himself, while other Primarchs who turned to chaos have long since ascended to demon princehood. Sanguinius remains as a mortal, and terrible as he was during the siege of Terra, just to be in the presence of Sanguinius, to learn from his millennia of experience and to replenish depleted stocks of gene seed, fills the Grand Company with renewed will and purpose. Much is expected of a fleet accompanied by Sanguinius, and the penalty for displeasing the Primarch is to meet the same macabre fate as befell the Legion's original Terran Astartes. Being a fleet-based legion, the Blood Angels take every opportunity to bring more ships into their service. They do this not just by boarding and claiming other vessels, but by infecting the crew with Nurgle's plagues, leaving them as ghost ships which can be easily tracked. The most audacious example of this was at Port Ma in M34, when a seemingly minor raid allowed the Blood Angels to contaminate the supplies for much of Battlefleet Gothic. More than 40 vessels, including a dozen capital ships, fell in their entirety to the contagion and became a part of the plague fleet. After the heresy, with nothing left on Mal Secundus for them to call home, the Blood Angels became fleet-based to better raid the Imperium. Unlike most of the Chaos Legions, they have never felt the draw of the Eye of Terror, and have certainly not been lured by the offer of inhabiting a demon world created in Nurgle's image. Though the Blood Angels had already turned their back on the place, Abaddon's mass crusades against the homes of the Chaos Legions drew them inexorably there. By this point, the changes wrought by Nurgle were so advanced that even Mortarion of the Death Guard, brought up breathing the noxious chemical smog of Barbarous, would not risk setting foot on the planet without his armor tightly sealed. The Loyalists found something approaching a demon world, inhabited only by shambling warp entities of the Plague God. The Imperial forces withdrew to orbit and subjected Bal Secundus to a sustained atomic bombardment, which exceeded even that of its Great War in its ferocity. The thrice-devastated moon was declared Perdicia and quarantined by the Imperium until it was swallowed by the ever-expanding borders of Ultramar Segmentum. Be it through arrogance or ignorance, the Ultramarines chose to settle what remained of the moon. The subsequent plague and the renegade actions of the chapter, founded to guard the area, sent convulsions through the realm for nearly a century afterwards. Although the tribes of the changed on Bal Secundus are now but a memory, mutants can be found on the fringes of every human society. Captives bearing the stigmata are thrown into the Stygian, fetid darkness of the ship's holds, and those resilient enough to survive until their captors have finished their work on the organ harvesting and exsanguination decks are tested further for compatibility with the Blood Angel gene seed. If deemed worthy, aspirants are subjected to batteries of surgical procedures and blood rites to implant and initiate the Sanguinius gene seed before being entombed within a Medicae sarcophagus for a year. These arcane mechanisms feed and guide the changes wrought by the various implants, so that when it finally opens, they emerge bloody but transformed, an echo of their cadaverous Primarch. Though a combination of psycho-indoctrination and gene line transference, they become imprinted with memories and character traits from Sanguinius' earliest days on Bal Secundus. In this way, they are reborn, sharing an unbreakable bond and a unified purpose. Those who fail the selection procedures serve the Legion for the rest of their lives, guarding and tending to their Astartes lores as they slumber within their sarcophagi. In part, this is due to fear, But a more powerful motivation is the desperate hope that their actions might prompt their masters to deem them worthy to become Astartes after all. Given the myriad diseases that proliferate aboard the Blood Angels' fleets, the life expectancy of most of these serfs is measured in weeks or months. Some, however, gain the favor of Nurgle and build a symbiotic relationship with their diseases, treating every new sore and pustule as an agonizing blessing. The original gene seed born by the Terran legionnaires of the 9th Legion was stable, efficient, and pure. But they, along with their gene line, were wiped from existence. Unknown to Sanguinius, just as Nurgle had polluted his soul, he had also tainted his flesh, and in turn the implants prepared from it to create the new Blood Angels. Because of this, the gene line of Sanguinius has become a curse, acting as a mark of Nurgle upon every Marine who bears it. These implants act more like a single parasitic organism than mere lumps of flesh. They aggressively drain nutrients and vitality from their host, causing the Blood Angels' characteristic gaunt, cadaverous appearance. In turn, the implants produce a seemingly endless array of potent diseases, to which the Marine becomes a carrier. The gene seed shields the host from the worst of the symptoms, and also protects itself by making the bearer remarkably resilient to damage, or at least heedless of its effects until after the battle has ended. The effect of all this is a buildup of toxins in the bloodstream which damages the organs, and if left unchecked, they penetrate the brain, causing the insanity of the Black Rage. The sanguinary priests treat the symptoms by administering frequent transfusions of uninfected blood. Although in extremis, it can be drunk and utilized by the body via a unique adaptation to the Primanor implant, or second stomach. The Blood Angels spend much of the long warp journeys between raids inside their sarcophagi, waking only as the next planet approaches. Each sarcophagus incorporates arcane life support equipment, which filters the toxin from their blood and allows the Marine to enter an enhanced state of suspended animation to slow down his constant decline. Though the gene seed wreaks a terrible toll on its host, this becomes far worse if the implants are damaged in any way. In order to regenerate, they draw even more harshly on the body's resources and release potent toxins, necessitating further transfusions and transplants. Needless to say, the only time that a Blood Angel's progenoid glands are removed is at the point of death, as to do otherwise would invite debilitating sickness. Although the principle that has guided the Blood Angels is to bring about the death of the Emperor, in practice this is all too often obscured by the need to quench their thirsts with the blood of their victims. Despite the fates of Sanguinius and the Blood Angels being intrinsically tied to that of Nurgle, the relationship is very different to that of the cult legions of the other Chaos Gods, where the Space Wolves, Raven Guard and White Scars are eager devotees. The Blood Angels spread disease across the galaxy, not for the love of it, but to hurt the hated Imperium. They also have little choice, needing to raid far and wide to obtain the untainted blood they need to survive, and are well aware that to achieve Nurgle's aim of infecting the entire galaxy would ultimately lead to their own extinction. As for their battle cry, during the Great Crusade, the Blood Angels were careful to give no cause for suspicion and went into battle swearing allegiance to the Emperor. Since the heresy, they are far more honest and open about their loyalties and motivations. And the battle cry, "For blood and for Sanguinius," has risen to prominence. supposedly so pure, supposedly so incorruptible. I say, you need to think again.